There is a calling, a beckoning from beyond ourselves, from a source far greater than any human wisdom or understanding. We, the chosen, are not called by the blaring trumpet of certainty, nor are we lured by the dazzling lights of easy answers. No, we are called by a voice not always loud, not always clear, but always present if we learn to listen. The world is full of noise, distractions, and clamor, but within each of us there is a quiet, powerful calling. We often ignore it, perhaps because it doesn't come in the grand form we expect. But this call, this whisper from beyond is always there, waiting for us to listen. As C.S. Lewis once said, "The real problem of the Christian life comes where people do not look for it. It comes the moment you wake up each morning. All your wishes and hopes for the day rush at you like wild animals, and the first job each morning consists simply in shoving them all back. In listening to that other voice, taking that other point of view, letting that other larger, stronger, quieter life come flowing in. In that quieter life is where we will find the clarity we are seeking. God's voice does not always come as a loud declaration. It is not always a thunderclap of certainty. No, often it comes as a gentle whisper, a nudge of direction that we may only hear if we stop long enough to listen. Yet, in that voice there is power. There's power. As Thomas Merton wisely said, the greatest need of our time is to listen to the voice of God, who speaks in the depths of our hearts. This voice is not distant. It is not out of reach. It is within us, close to us, and always calling us to something higher. But we must be ready to hear it. The problem lies not in God's willingness to speak, but in our inability to listen. We live in a world that is constantly vying for our attention. Every moment we are bombarded by messages, demands, and expectations. It becomes easy to forget that the most profound answers often come not in the loudest moments, but in the quietest ones. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world, C.S. Lewis observed. And yet, we often ignore this call, seeking the loud, the obvious, the immediate. There is a profound truth in the fact that God's voice is not always what we expect. We often want clarity, certainty, and dramatic signs. We want God to appear like a king on a throne or a booming voice from the heavens. But God speaks through the ordinary. He speaks through the subtle, the quiet, the unnoticed. It is easy to miss. We think that God's guidance must come with the grandiosity of a burning bush or a miracle, but more often it comes through the still, small moments. It is found in the quiet of our hearts when we take a moment to pause and listen. This is why silence is so important. In a world filled with constant noise, silence is a rare and precious thing. We often shy away from silence because it feels uncomfortable, unsettling. Yet silence is the gateway through which we begin to hear that voice. The psalmist wrote, "Be still and know that I am God." There is a profound truth in these words. Stillness is not about being idle. It is about creating space for God to speak. We live in a world of distractions, smartphones, social media, work pressures, noise on every corner. But the ability to hear God's voice begins with our willingness to create moments of silence, to intentionally step away from the distractions and sit in the quiet. It is in the silence that we start to hear God speaking, but even then, it's not always easy to distinguish his voice from the other voices that clutter our minds. The voice of God is not loud or brash, it is gentle, humble, and patient. It often sounds like a thought that resonates deeply in our hearts, a sudden sense of clarity, or an unexplainable peace in the midst of uncertainty. The Lord does not delight in the strength of the horse, nor take pleasure in the legs of a man. The Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him, in those who hope in his steadfast love, the Psalms remind us. It is not in the loudness of our own striving that God speaks, but in the quiet submission of our hearts, in the surrender to his guidance. The voice of God often requires us to trust when we cannot see the outcome. It calls us to move forward in faith, even when the way seems unclear. This is where the call to obedience comes in. Listening to God's voice isn't simply about hearing the words, it is about responding. Obedience is not about blind following, but about trust. It's the trust that when God calls us to take a step, even though we can't see the whole picture, he knows the way. Obedience is the process of becoming what we were made to be, as Richard Foster so wisely said. It is not about following rules or rituals, but about aligning ourselves with the will of God, trusting that his plan is greater than anything we could have imagined. We are all on a journey, and that journey will never look the same for each of us. But God's voice, when heard and obeyed, transforms us. It reshapes us. It calls us into a greater version of ourselves, one that is more patient, more loving, more aware of the needs of others. It is not what we do that matters most, but how we respond to God, John Stott once wrote. Our response to his voice, our willingness to step out in faith, has the power to change not just our own lives, but the lives of those around us. For when we listen to God's voice and follow his direction, we begin to reflect his character in the world. The transformation that comes from hearing God's voice is profound. When we align ourselves with his will, we are not only transformed in our actions, but in our very nature. God's voice doesn't just shape our decisions, it shapes who we are. It refines us, purifies us, and draws us closer to the person we were always meant to be. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains, Lewis again said. It is through his voice that we become the people he intended us to be. Perhaps the greatest part of hearing God's voice is the invitation it offers us. The call to listen is not one of burden, but one of invitation. It is an invitation to peace, to hope, to a life that is greater than we can imagine. When we hear and respond to God's voice, we are given the gift of a transformed heart, a transformed purpose, and a transformed life. It is an invitation to step into something eternal, something lasting, something beyond what this world can offer. So, today I challenge you to listen. Listen with the stillness of your heart. Listen in the quiet moments, and when you hear that gentle whisper, respond. Trust that his voice is leading you to something greater. And know that, in that act of obedience, you will find transformation not just in your life, but in the lives of those around you. God is always speaking. The question is, are we ready to listen? In life, we often find ourselves waiting for grand signs, hoping for moments of clarity, and expecting God's voice to thunder from the heavens. But the truth is, God's voice is not always what we expect. We tend to imagine his guidance coming in obvious, unmistakable ways, but more often than not, it appears in subtle whispers, soft nudges, and quiet moments of reflection. As C.S. Lewis wisely noted, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our pleasures, but shouts in our pains. His voice is not bound by the dramatic or the spectacular. It is woven into the everyday, the ordinary, and the seemingly mundane. So often we miss it. We are too focused on the noise of the world around us, the constant distractions, the pressure to succeed, the pull of our own desires, to notice the quiet ways in which God is speaking to us. But it is precisely in these quieter moments that his voice can be heard the most clearly. As the prophet Elijah discovered, God was not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in the gentle whisper that followed 1 Kings 19:12. It is in stillness, not noise, that God's guidance is often found. When we seek God's voice, we must learn to let go of our expectations. We want the loud, the obvious, the powerful, but God often speaks in ways we least anticipate. We are like children waiting for a gift, unaware that the gift is not wrapped in the grandest paper, but in the simplest form, quiet, humble, and subtle. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart, God promises in Jeremiah 29:13. That means we must seek him not just in the big moments, but in the small, quiet ones, when we least expect to hear him. We often mistake the lack of dramatic signs for the lack of God's presence, but in truth, he is always near. The kingdom of God is not coming with signs to be observed, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there, for behold, the kingdom of God is in the midst of you, Luke 17:20-21. The voice of God is already present within us, surrounding us, if only we learn to listen. The key is to quiet our hearts and open our ears, to be still enough to recognize it when it counts. In our lives, we often seek certainty and clarity, but faith is not about having all the answers. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase, as Martin Luther King Jr. so profoundly said. God's voice doesn't always offer the whole picture up front, but it does give us the direction we need for the next step. Trusting him means stepping out in faith, even when we cannot see the outcome, knowing that he will guide us as we walk. There is also a profound peace in learning to recognize that God's voice often calls us in unexpected ways. It is not always the voice of command or force, but the voice of invitation. It invites us to trust, to surrender, to let go of our own plans and align ourselves with his will. Come to me, all the weary and burdened, and I will give you rest, Jesus promises in Matthew 11:28. When we listen to his voice, we find not only guidance, but rest and peace and assurance that we are never alone in our journey. So today, let us open our hearts to the unexpected ways God speaks. Let us not be discouraged when His voice doesn't come as we imagine, but instead, let us listen more intently in the quiet moments. His voice is always there, gentle, loving, guiding us toward the life He has planned for us. When we seek Him with all our hearts, we will find that He is always near, always speaking, always inviting us to take the next step in faith. In a world that is perpetually rushing, a world that seems to have forgotten what it means to slow down and pause, we often find ourselves struggling to hear the quiet, essential truths that can guide us through life. We are surrounded by noise, physical noise, emotional noise, and mental noise. The constant distractions of modern life, the ringing phones, the endless streams of information, the demands of our time make it increasingly difficult to find stillness, to simply be quiet. Yet it is in stillness that we discover the clarity and wisdom that can change everything. Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation, the mystic Rumi once said. If we are to truly hear, if we are to discover the deeper calling of our hearts, we must first learn the art of stillness. Stillness is not merely the absence of noise. It is not the same as being idle or inactive. Stillness is a purposeful quiet, a space we carve out where we can connect with our deepest selves, with the divine, and with the truths that lie beyond the clamor of the world. It is in this space that we can hear the voice of God, and it is here that our most profound transformations occur. The soul is here for its own joy, Rumi said again, and this joy is found in the quiet moments, when we stop and listen to the whispers of our inner being. The problem, of course, is that our world has made it increasingly difficult to find such stillness. We are constantly moving, constantly reacting, constantly running toward the next task, the next achievement, the next deadline. The world, in its rush, has become addicted to noise, and in doing so, it has drowned out the sacred moments of reflection and listening. As a result, we lose touch with what truly matters, with the things that give us peace, with the inner guidance that can lead us toward our most meaningful lives. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings, the author of Unnati Roy once observed, reminding us that we can become enslaved by the pace of the world, trapped in a cycle of endless doing without being. In the midst of all this chaos, the call to stillness is not merely a suggestion, it is essential. It is in stillness that we are able to discern the quiet voice of God, who speaks not in the loud, dramatic moments, but in the soft, humble places of our lives. We often miss this voice because we are too busy looking for something grander. God is not in the thunder, the fire, or the earthquake. He is in the still, small voice Elijah discovered in the wilderness. In the same way, the divine speaks to us not through grandiose displays, but through subtle impressions, quiet nudges, and gentle thoughts that, when we slow down enough to hear them, transform our lives. Stillness offers you as clarity. It offers us the space to reflect, process, and to hear our inner voice. Without it, we become like a leaf blown around by every passing wind. Our lives can feel like a constant state of reaction, with little room for intentional action. In quietness and trust is your strength, the Bible reminds us in Isaiah 30:15. When we stop and listen, when we allow ourselves to sit in the silence, we create space for that inner strength, to emerge. The power of stillness also lies in its ability to help us connect with our deeper purpose. We live in a world that constantly tells us who we should be, what we should want, and how we should live. These external pressures often drown out the still, small voice within that knows who we are meant to be and what we are meant to do. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it, said Rumi. When we allow ourselves to be still, we can begin to recognize and dismantle these barriers, allowing our true selves, our true calling, to emerge. The world often tells us that action is the key to success, that we must always be doing, always be striving. But stillness teaches us that there is wisdom in stopping, in reflecting, in being. It is in the quiet moments that we discover new ideas, new insights, and new directions for our lives. The writer and thinker Henry David Thoreau, who spent years living in solitude and simplicity at Walden Pond, wrote, "We live in the midst of an infinite world, but our lives are a poor excuse for it. The world is, as it were, a mirror that reflects our own image. Stillness is the means of awakening to this world, the key to unlocking the truths we have buried within us." The power of stillness is transformative. It strips away the layers of distraction and brings us back to our true selves. It is in stillness that we reconnect with our purpose and realign our priorities. But it is not an easy practice. In a world that values productivity and constant motion, stillness can feel uncomfortable, even unnecessary. We may fear that if we stop, if we take a moment to pause, we will fall behind or miss out. But the truth is, stillness does not cause us to lose momentum. It gives us the clarity to move forward with intention and purpose. We are human beings, not human beings, not human beings. The famous philosopher Wayne Dyer. It is in being, in pausing, in reflecting, that we find the energy and wisdom to do what we are truly called to do. Stillness is also a way of reclaiming our inner peace. In a world filled with anxiety, stress, and constant demand, it is easy to lose sight of the peace that is always available to us. But the peace we seek is not found in external circumstances. It is found in the quiet of our hearts. As the poet Eckhart Tolle so profoundly put it, stillness is not the absence of thought, but the space in which thought arises when we are still. We allow ourselves to return to that place of peace, to connect with the inner calm that is always present within us, waiting to be rediscovered. This peace, born of stillness, has the power to transform not only our lives, but the lives of those around us. When we are able to cultivate stillness in our hearts, we bring peace to our families, our workplaces, and our communities. We become a source of calm in the midst of chaos, a voice of clarity in the midst of confusion. Be still and know that I am God, the Bible reminds us in Psalm 46:10. It is in this stillness, in this quiet connection with the divine, that we find the power to face any challenge, to navigate any storm, and to walk through life with unwavering confidence and grace. In conclusion, the art of stillness is not just a practice, it is a way of life. It is the key to reconnecting with our purpose, with our inner wisdom, and with the divine guidance that is always available to us. In a world that values speed and noise, stillness is a radical act of choice to slow down, to listen, and to trust that the answers we seek are already within us. Silence is not empty, it is full of answers, the writer and philosopher Anonymous once said. When we embrace stillness, we open ourselves to those answers. And in doing so, we begin the journey toward a more peaceful, purposeful, and profound life. Faith is a powerful force, one that can transform our lives in ways we cannot always predict or fully understand. It is often said that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. But what does this really mean for us, especially when faced with the uncertainties and challenges of life? Faith is not simply a passive belief in something, it is an active trust that guides us forward, even when the path is unclear. As the great theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, faith is not a feeling, it is the decision to trust in what we cannot see. Faith calls us to take a step, even when we do not have the entire staircase in view. We are asked to trust in something beyond our own understanding, to believe that the unseen hand of God is leading us even when we cannot see the way. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase, as Martin Luther King Jr. famously said. So often, we wait for the full picture to emerge, for all the answers to be clear before we move forward. But faith teaches us that it is in the stepping out, in the act of trusting, that the path becomes clear. The act of faith is an act of courage. It requires us to surrender our desire for control, to let go of the need to understand everything, and to step into the unknown with confidence. In the words of Helen Keller, faith is the strength by which a shattered world shall emerge into the light. Life is filled with moments of doubt, moments when everything seems uncertain, and yet it is in those moments that faith holds the power to carry us through. Faith does not promise that everything will be easy or that all of our questions will be answered, but it does promise that we will not walk alone. In our lives, faith often requires us to go against the grain of what we see around us. The world tells us to rely on our own strength, to trust in what we can see, and to seek security in our own efforts. But faith calls us to look beyond the immediate and trust in something greater. We walk by faith, not by sight, the Bible reminds us in 2 Corinthians 5:7. It is through faith that we can endure challenges, face our fears, and rise above our circumstances. Faith opens doors that would otherwise remain closed and leads us to possibilities that we could never have imagined on our own. Faith is not just about believing in something, it is about acting on that belief. It is about stepping forward in trust, even when we do not have all the answers. As C.S. Lewis said, faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted, in spite of your changing moods when we choose faith. we choose to trust in something greater than ourselves. We choose to believe that the future holds promise, that there is purpose in every step we take, and that, even when the way is unclear, God is leading us towards something beautiful. So today, I encourage you to take that step, to trust even when the way seems uncertain, to believe even when you cannot see the entire picture. For in faith, we find the strength to face the challenges of life, the courage to step into the unknown, and the assurance that we are never alone on this journey. The road ahead may not always be smooth, but with faith as our guide, we can be confident that we are headed towards something greater than we could ever have imagined.